So just because you have a contract may not mean that that's going to be an automatic hands down. There's still underwriting, there's still compliance, there's still a lot of other.
But from a banking industry perspective, typically those questions around audited financials, what level of quality financials, the banking relationship part, usually those are things that are not specific to the industry and not specific to whether you have a government contract. Now, we do evaluate that, right? If you tell us you have a DCA approved accounting system, you've been through a DCA audit, and you can give us the results of that audit, do those things matter, right? We want to help them continue the mission and further their business. Now, I get it as an entrepreneur or as a business owner, you may say, well, if you're not the one that's solving my problem today, what use are you to me? But I think at the same time, we still view that as being part of the solution, whether it's us delivering that solution.
Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of the Construction MF'ers podcast. I'm founder and CEO of Mobilization Funding. My name is Scott Peper, and I am excited to bring to you guys today the world of banking from Bank of America's government contracting team. Christa Williams and Chris Patty, welcome to the show, and thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I am excited to have you guys on because too often it is so difficult for folks to sift through the banking environment, including mobilization funding, whether it's private finance or traditional finance. But look, most customers want to find a traditional banking program. We work a ton with government contractors, whether they're either the primes or subs direct to primes, companies that are working directly with city, federal governments, municipalities, doing all different scopes of work, delivering products and services. And I know you guys are experts in the space of government contracting. You understand and see that. Like us, you're not able to finance everyone. Everyone has the certain lanes they have to stay in. And my goal today is for folks to get information and questions answered that they might not normally otherwise be able to answer walking into a Bank of America branch.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
First question is, I'm a government contractor doing work and I want to be bankable. Does that mean that just because I have a government contract that I automatically can be bankable with getting loans?
The short answer is no. And I'll take a first jab at it, but it's not a if this then that type situation. As the government has its own regulations, we as a bank body are also regulated, and any other bank that you're going to talk to, not just Bank of America. But you have restrictions, you have guidelines, you have policies that you have to operate within that govern your decision making. So just because you have a contract may not mean that that's going to be an automatic hands down. There's still underwriting, there's still compliance, there's still a lot of other questions that come into play. But at least, what I would say is it's a good thing because, government receivables are, reliable. So so it's a good start, but it's not necessarily a slam dunk 100% answer.
Yeah. So if I have government receivables, I'm awarded a contract to provide a service or product that I do all the time. I have a track record of, and now I have this government contract and the receivables are good. Would I automatically then be able to jump past some of the more traditional hoops? For example, like having audited financials or reviewed financials, or maybe I don't have perfectly organized financials, or maybe I don't have a deposit relationship yet with the bank. Do any of those things matter when I have a government contract and for what I do and know how to do?
You want me to jump on that one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it does. So I would say typically those types, and Christa and I should say this too, and I'll speak for her too. Our opinions here are ours, not necessarily the bank, right? And so, but from a banking industry perspective, typically those questions around audited financials, what level of quality financials, the banking relationship part, usually those are things that are not specific to the industry and not specific to whether you have a government contract. Now, we do evaluate that, right? If you tell us you have a DCA approved accounting system, you've been through a DCA audit, and you can give us the results of that audit. Do those things matter? Yes, they do. They absolutely matter to us. But sometimes we may still come to you and say, okay, we're going to need to move to reviewed financials because the level of credit ask, the dollar amount of, whatever that funding is, whether that's, equipment funding or line of credit funding, whatever the need is, because of the dollar amount of that. And every bank is different in their policies on when they may require a higher level, but oftentimes that's not dependent upon industry specific, or the fact that you have that contract may not negate that. But I think there are things we see in this industry because of the compliance around it and the regulatory environment around the industry. Those that operate successfully within that, I think, helps give a bank comfort to understand that you're there's some guardrails there, I would say, from an industry perspective, if that makes sense, that I think banks take comfort in.
Yeah. One of the things that we talk about a lot with our customers, and I've even talked about it on our show or on LinkedIn, is probably 55, 60% of our world is construction. And so I like to give construction analogies often, but I consider when you take any business, regardless of the industry you're in, having a solid set of reports, having financials, having organized systems and processes for your people, your process, your culture, how you invoice, how you recognize that revenue, your expenses. That's just a solid foundation for any business to work off of. And one of the pieces of advice we give folks, even when you're really small, it's a lot easier to set that foundation in place then. And when you go for any type of financing, the stronger that foundation is, the more options you're going to have. And sometimes that foundation will also prevent you, or the lack of a foundation will prevent you from even having certain options. And I think what I tell people is traditional financing, if you want the most traditional sense of financing, which is a perfect line of credit that you can use any way you want, given by a bank, you better have a really strong foundation amongst a bunch of other things. And so is that fair advice to give to folks? And how do you, if so, how do you kind of characterize that for Bank of America, for people that are looking to work in that realm?
I'll jump on this one, Chris. I would say the foundation is probably some of the more key things that I talk to, especially when maybe a company is at the smaller end or they're just getting started, or you run into some folks at a conference and they're just like, what do I do? How do I even get started? What works for you in the first few phases may not be what you use 10 years from now, and vice versa. So when you're setting up your foundation, I'd say, make it scalable with the size of your company. Doesn't mean you need to go out and get the most expensive ERP system. Get what's appropriate for where you are at this moment. Same with all your certifications. It may be easier to pay somebody to do it all for you, but then, you don't know all the inner workings of how something operates. So I'd say laying that foundation is very, very important at the beginning. And, to your point earlier, it does show well when you are a company that's, starting out and you're just getting those contracts, and we know that you've got all your ducks in a row. That definitely gives a lot more, I would say, some comfort when you're reviewing it and you're understanding the business. Because if you're just getting to know a company you're asking us for money, we need to know your business. How are you operating? Showcasing a lot of that, helps build a lot of that trust and comfort level.
Yeah. What are some of the specific things inside that foundation that just are like I like call them death nails or deal killers, like, because it's easy for us to say, hey, perfect systems and perfect process. And I could hear someone that I would talk to in a normal sense say to me, okay, Skip, but what does that mean? Maybe the easier way for us to enter the conversation is what should you not be doing? And then we can kind of tackle what perfect might look like.
That's a great question.
So I'll jump in for just a second. I think sometimes there's the internal focus, right? And we can, Chris and I can sort of talk about that and collaborate there. I think the other thing that Chris and I will talk to folks about is not just looking internally, but externally and their partners, right? So when you look at, who is your CPA, who is your consulting firm, who is your legal representation, right? When I think companies sometimes, because I mean, they have limited capital, they're getting started. I understand it. You know, those investments are expensive, and it's easy for us to advise you on how to spend money. You know, go out and spend money in ways that you don't have it. But I think those foundations are very important, right? So if we sense that maybe, you know, we've had folks come up to us and say, we've won our first prime contract, and we say, congratulations. And they say, yeah, but it's under protest. And I'm concerned I don't have the right legal representation to manage through that protest, you know, just an example, right? So having those partners in place early, I think not only help you when you are successful and as you grow, but I think it also, they can be advisors to you as well, right? They hopefully, if you're picking someone who has that industry expertise, they have other clients like you. They have other clients that have been on that path. Every company's different, every situation is different, but there's some of these things, and you see it, Scott, too, right? You see these sort of common trends as you see these companies grow, these milestones, different things that they accomplish, and so I think they can be an advisor to you to help you with some of those discussions around internal. You know, do I hire an internal CFO, or do I outsource that? You know, we see that a lot with business development, right? Business development and capture is expensive. Do I use an outside firm, or do I go pay someone and put them on overhead to come in-house? Those are decisions that it's great to have other folks there in the room to help you from an advisory standpoint, right? And so I think those are things we see that can help shape some of those things.
Christa, did you have a couple things that you were going to say, like these are just complete deal killers that you might see?
I mean, no, Chris is absolutely right. I think, when, you know, in some of the conversations you've had with, that we've had, and somebody says, oh, well, I have a CPA and they were my best buddy in college. They may have been a great buddy, but they're not, they don't know what the FAR is. They think it's a distance, same with the attorneys. If they don't know what you're, working in, how are they best going to represent you? So I think those are big things and big, signals that when we see that, it's like, that's going to be some of the recommendations, but, just really making sure that if we see that they're on the right track, that's where, that's where we can kind of get a sense for where they're going. And we'll often, again, they may not know that there's different options, or they may not know that there's a difference in between just a regular attorney or a government contracting attorney. And so it's, being able to have the conversation with them, and that, they're open to, just hearing those recommendations to make sure that they're put in the best position. Those are things that would be standouts for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add, Scott, I'm sorry. Just one thing that I didn't say when you asked about deal killers, and that's a tough question. That is
It's
a
a
hard
good
question
one.
to answer. One thing I would say is the financial statements that you provide the bank, right? That's the language of how we analyze the company and we make determinations on credit. There's other factors there too, right? But if we have concerns about the quality of that, the consistency of that, are you able to produce those in a timely way? Are they accurate when they come to us? Those are things that I think can be deal killers, right? I think those are hard to overcome, right? You come back and say, hey, we just realized we had something wrong in our financials. We've had to correct it. We were showing a profit. We're now showing a loss. Those are things that can create uncertainty, right? Because in just, like with any relationship, you've got to have that trust and confidence. And so there's probably other things that are deal killers there. But I think the other thing we look at is a lot of times when businesses start, it starts with that business owner, that entrepreneur. They're it, right? And then as they grow, they build out that team. I think helping understand that succession plan, understanding that risk. I think a lot of times folks talk to us about how do I sort of unlink myself from the business, whether that's from a personal guarantee standpoint, or from, I'm having to give my personal tax returns every year and they're still looking at that, or they're talking to me about how much money I take out of the company. I think a lot of that goes back into how dependent is that company on that individual. And so I think being able to build a team over time that takes that burden away, and the bank understands, okay, if that individual, he or she that owns and started that company, if they were to step away or something, God forbid, something catastrophic happened, what does that business do at that point? I think any of those things, as you think through those processes, I think those are the things that give the bank comfort when you're doing that right and you're building that in a way that you're creating that diversification. But I think it continues to be independent on that individual. Doesn't mean you're not bankable. Doesn't mean that you can't have a relationship, a full relationship. There's probably always going to be some questions around that and some things that are going to concern the bank. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, you guys make a great point. And I love that you brought up, Chris, the team and who you surround yourself with. And Christa, you nailed it with just because they're your friend or relative and you can trust them more doesn't mean they're going to help you the most. And a lot of times, if we're really being honest, people gravitate to folks they can trust the most or they know more because of their own insecurity and they don't want to look like silly or dumb or be
Yeah.
judged. And one of the things I like to tell everybody is, hey man, just for the record, everyone know, like you're always being judged. All right. But it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean someone's making judgment on you. They're judging you. And a lot of times, and good people will judge and then help you, just like you're doing
Yeah.
now. Like you said, we're judging what you're doing so that we can help you by either making a loan so you can grow your business.
Yeah.
In that judgment process, a lot of value can come out of that.
Mhm.
Like, here's a great attorney that you probably should use. This one's not great for that reason. And here's one you can use.
Yeah.
That's a relationship you're not going to get without being judged. Here's a great construction accountant who can help you get bonding and you can come to us 12 months from now, organize everything, finish these 2 projects you're on, take care of that one little problem you had.
Yeah.
Here's what you need your financials to look like to be bankable. So you got judged, you were given guidance, you got 2 new relationships and a path forward that in 12 short months, you're going to move forward. And I always tell people like, no, but I need this contract now. I'm like, yeah, but you're not retiring for 20 years. So it's okay. Like you're going to have to go through these 12 months. Like you just got tremendous value there. Don't think, oh, that was a waste of my time. It was not a waste of your time. It was actually a really good use of your time. And I think both of you in a very short period of time, we've been on here for what, 10 minutes now? You just illustrated that exact point of how much value you can get just going through the process and being judged. Again, not a judgment, but judged. And so overcoming some of those insecurities to become bankable and trustworthy. Now, leading to a next question is, why is all that important? And why is it so critical to know they have a supporting team? And you outline that in Chris did in the entrepreneurial world. But what we also know in working with many different companies, and I say we, the 3 of us, is we know what a company is going to look like and how that business vibrates when you're growing at 15, 20% and you haven't been there before. And what we're trying to help is protect someone from the problems that can occur if you don't have a strong foundation.
Mhm.
Can you guys talk a little bit about how did you learn? Is there a story or two that, how did you learn that having a great team was important? What problem occurred? And you said, well, I wish they had the right accountant or attorney. Like, do you have a story you could kind of share? Of course, not with specifics, but
Yeah.
people, names, but.
I would say that, I've kind of got 2 different scenarios to illustrate that. And one was where a company I worked with years and years ago on an annual basis, talking about having that team around you, annual basis had their bank, their CPA, their attorney, their, personal, individual that handled their wealth, all of those individuals all came together and they basically had a planning and strategy session for the day. And it was all around the owner's focus of, okay, this is where I think I want to take the company, or this is what I want to do over the next year. What are the implications from every point of view? And the fact that they really allowed that to help curtail some of their judgment and was a big advantage for them because it keeps the chains of communication open with everybody in that, and it showed that cohesive team that was supporting the company. And at that point it's you're hearing recommendations, and that if they're giving you a recommendation, or if somebody's suggesting a teaming partner or saying, hey, I've got somebody else who can do that can help you get from A to Z faster, that's the kind of collaborative partner that I think works really well. I'd say on the flip side of that is, when a lot of times, and you see this sometimes when it's just a single shop or an individual with a great idea, and they, bid something and they win it, and then they don't realize some of the follow-on processes to it, and really then realize that they're maybe a little short on the pricing, or they're short staffed and they're not going to be able to, you know, set up as fast as they expected, or, what have you. They were the brainchild behind the business. So not having that team of partners, either internally or externally, to weigh in and say, hey, this is how you can, support this or approach it going forward. It's, again, to your point earlier, was, you may be judged, but not in a negative way. I always say there's no stupid question. The stupid ones are the ones that you don't ask, and you just assume an answer. But being okay that where your I guess where where your strengths lie, and where your weaknesses are, and being able to surround yourself with people that are going to support you and not judge you negatively for those weaknesses, and say, okay, this is why you've got me to help you, and you have that. So I'd say there's, those are two different stories or different sides of that
Yeah.
scenario.
Chris, you brought up a good point when you were talking about the evaluation process, and you mentioned like how you behave in the process. I don't think those are your exact words, but basically, if you apply and then we ask you for something, can you turn it around? When you send everything in, is it complete? Is it organized? Is it in a way that I can understand it? Is it not necessarily set up perfectly or not? But if we ask some question that's pretty common, are you able to answer it? So I think maybe we could touch on that a little bit as folks who are applying or are trying to get that. Why is how you behave in the process so important to a lender in making a decision?
Yeah, I think it's human nature, right? You don't want to judge someone if they're new and they're new to this process, right? I mean, we all had to learn and start somewhere. See, but I think part of that is incumbent on the banker that you're working with. And I'd say this again, this isn't specific to us, it's specific to all banks. I think it's really, they should help guide you into these are the things that we need, right? And so then I think once they've given you sort of this is our list of asks, some of that may be business background, some of that may be financial information, whatever the case may be. I think then you've been able to provide that in a timely way, and then organizing that, I think, is important, because you are that is part of the process, right? We want to understand how do you evaluate, how strong your internal systems are. That's hard, right? It's subjective in some ways, but one of the objective ways is if I ask for this report, can you produce that report, right? That would be the same as, maybe you're going to one of your employees and asking them a question. How do you can ask the question, but how do you verify, trust but verify, right? How do you do that? I think those are ways we evaluate that in the process. And I think, again, not to going back to some of the themes, I think your outside partners can help you with that, right? I think if you have a CPA that has done this for a while, worked in this industry, they should have relationships at multiple banks, and they probably have a pretty good idea. Here's the things the bank are going to ask you about. Let me help you with this, right? I think that it speaks to our evaluation of the team around you, and then your ability sort of to manage those finances, manage those funds. You're winning these great contracts, you're doing good work, but if you can't manage that, and manage that money, manage your costs, those types of things, those things can negate all of the positives, right? And so us kind of being able to evaluate that, I think, is part of that process.
Yeah,
I
I
hope that
love that.
answers the question. It's a tough question, but I hope that
Yeah.
sort of touches on
No,
it.
it does. And you brought up a good point too. I think leveraging your professional services that you can hire, like there's a decision you can make. Like you can't necessarily be in total control over what jobs you win. You can't control a lot of macro factors around the jobs, the customers, the project, the awards, but you can control who you surround yourself with and keep around you. That is within your control. And I think what you just said is really important for folks to hear and understand is leverage not only their expertise, but their relationships and the value of that relationship. If you're looking for ultimately financing from Chris and Christa here, okay, it's going to be really critical if you have everything buttoned up, But you know what? If everything's buttoned up and you're working with someone that you guys know in an accounting firm that you have 10 other relationships with and you've known for 15 years and they have multiple successful relationships, it's going to hold some weight to it, you know, like, and not only it holds weight, yes, because of the relationship, but not because you guys went to college with that person, but because you have a reputation of they bring a customer, their customer executes. You can trust the information, leverage that kind of thing. That's how you can skip years of time that if you tried to take that venture with you and your buddy from college who doesn't have any government contracting, that's how you advance yourself in time, you know? And I think that was really critical to hear. Attorneys and accountants, especially with that. Bonding agents is another one. Those can be really valuable. So on that sense, maybe can you highlight 3 or 4 of the traits of what a very successful company looks like that comes to you? Like they come to you and these are the 4 or 5 traits they might possess, both maybe in the entrepreneur, the leadership team, inside the company, and maybe what their systems and processes look like. If someone were to try to emulate them, what would they be?
Yeah. I mean, we could probably just go back and forth on different things. I mean, having that core foundation and team, that CPA, that attorney that is known, that knows this industry backwards and forwards, that's going to be, a telltale sign of a client that's, or a company that's on the right track. Um, you know, being able to answer all those questions. I always kind of joke with folks and say, you see people get humiliated on Shark Tank because they don't understand their numbers. They don't know how to explain the business and they're just, the brains behind it. But, really being able to make sure that you can, speak through all of that too is, not just, relishing it off to somebody else, but really being involved, I think is also key.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, you think about when you're saying the characteristics of success. I mean, I think when we think of it from the government contracting world, think of it like past performance in some degrees, right? So you may be a newer company and maybe you don't have that past performance yet, but we really look at this industry and say, okay, what is your background to get into this industry, right? I think government contracting is one. It's hard for someone to just say, I've never done government contracting before, but I'm going to be a government contractor, right? I was a PM at a company. Maybe I wasn't a C-suite executive, but I was performed on a contract. I worked as, I was working for a government customer, whatever the case may be. We see that a lot. And, government customer really likes what you do. Hey, you ought to think about going and starting your own company and support us because I like what you do. I like what you stand for. I think the other things we think about are, financials matter. It's not the only thing, but it's probably the most important thing to us. Are you profitable? What is your leverage profile look like? We think about. I think everybody, regardless of your level of you've been in business, right, or sophistication, we can all think of it from our own personal finances, right? You go to apply for a mortgage, they want to know everybody's familiar. A lot of folks are called, a debt ratio. Well, all that is how leveraged are you? Well, that's the same way we're looking at your business. How leveraged are you? How can you sustain the things don't always go according to plan. Look at COVID, right? Who in the world would have thought that was going to happen? Can you sustain and have capacity to sustain things that didn't go the way you thought they were going to? You're not going to be able to cost every job exactly like you thought. We understand that, right? But if there are some variances in there, how small are those variances and can you manage that? And then also, if you do miss it, do you have the resources to be able to sort of absorb that? And I know depending on where companies are at different stages, we look at management, obviously their experience, their background. We talked a lot about systems already, so I don't want to, belabor that point, but I think that's important too. But I think there's all these intangibles that go into that evaluation to look at success.
I think one other thing I'll add is because it's relevant to us is your backlog. So just as much as your past performance is, we look at your backlog. Do you have 2 contracts? Do you have one that is 90% of your receivables? Do you have, all 5 of them are expiring in the same year that you also graduate the 8A and you have nothing else in the pipeline? So we look at So that I'd say is somebody that's really successful is constantly monitoring not just your active backlog, but what's in the pipeline and where is it? Is it, do you have something that's, we just identified it, but it's coming out in a year versus, we're in the final down select for this one and we're going to add it because we're going to be finishing out a particular contract. So having a little bit forward thought on that too is something that we definitely see the scalability of, okay, we're growing outside of our size standards, so we're going to manage that. It all goes into that backlog discussion as well.
Yeah, the other thing, Scott, is that's a great point about backlog, Chris. I think in the diversification, right? So the other thing we will talk to entrepreneurs about is, and not always, again, they start their business for different reasons, but there are a lot of entrepreneurs that are thinking about going into it, thinking about, I want to build this business. And then they think about the exit, right? Whether that's, I want to pass it on to my next generation, whether that's, I want to sell it. Maybe I want to be an employee-owned company and I want to sell the company to my employees and let them take the company to the next level. But we talk to them about the things that make their business more valuable typically also leads to making it look more favorable to the bank, right? So, diversification in your contract base makes you absolutely more valuable as a company, right? Diversification, not just having more than one contract, but different agencies, different type, can you win full and open work? Is it all set aside work? Those types of things, right? So we talk to them about that. And those are things that the bank looks at as well. Not that we get into worrying about what your business is worth. That's not necessarily our point. But a lot of times those things that someone looks at your company and says, okay, what makes this company more valuable than company B? A lot of times those factors also allow, or from a bank standpoint, makes that company a better credit risk in a lot of ways too. So sometimes we think, when we translate it that way, I think sometimes that resonates with entrepreneurs, especially.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think those to me are fundamental foundational issues that are just good or bad, better or worse. And so like, if you control your own customer, no one customer represents an extraordinary amount of your business. A business that has, a $10 million business made up of $100 tickets is way more strong than a $10 million business with 10 $1 million tickets, and someone would be like, well, why is that? I'm like, going after that's $1 million contract. I'm like, actually, it's sometimes that's actually a weakness, I'd rather see 10, $100,000 contracts if you're thinking about safe and security. And so you're making great points there that I think goes along with an entrepreneurial journey of like, you don't need to elephant hunt. Like, a lot of singles and doubles well executed are far superior to a home run. Even if you have this amazing year, you crushed it. You were doing a couple $1 million a year maybe, and all of a sudden you got a $5 million contract, or maybe you're doing tens of millions of dollars a year and you got a $50 million contract. Doesn't matter which one you want to analogy. And next year you've grown from, a $30 million company to a $70 million company, but it was made up of a $40 million contract. No one's really giving you credit for being a $70 million company when that contract's over. You're kind of looked at as a $30 or $35 million company, and of course, unless you have another one right behind it and you're executing in the middle of another one. But those are the things that sometimes entrepreneurs think are really good, but they're actually not necessarily valuable. I think your analogy to what is valuable for a business on an exit, which every entrepreneur can relate to, is very valuable, just making a business valuable to be able to lend to as well. And you need access to capital to be able to grow, to ultimately get to a business that you'd want to exit anyway. So I think that's a great analogy and an awesome point. I'm glad you made that reference, because that is really a good, solid way for folks to grasp onto the thought process. All right, transitioning to government contracting at Bank of America. So if I walked in Bank of America prior to knowing you guys in this world, I would have never said, hey, I'm a government contractor. Can you connect me to the government contracting department? Never would have thought that. So how do folks know that you exist? How can they best find you when they're within the bank? I'm almost, I don't want to say 100%, but I'm highly certain there's plenty of Bank of America customers listening to this podcast saying, I didn't know that are government contractors that are going to say, I didn't know Bank of America had a government contracting arm. And they're probably going to call up my old school world, I would say premier or private banker, which doesn't exist anymore in the Bank of America, I know. But I'm like, why didn't you tell me that Christa and Chris are around, But how do they get access to you as a Bank of America customer and see you here now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that it goes back to kind of telling the story as to how we got here. I've been at the bank. This is my 20th year at B of A, and 15 years ago, I got into the commercial bank. So I'm working with, existing businesses, established companies. It wasn't in the brick and mortar that you see around, towns. And I was introduced to my very first government contractor and just kind of found my position there. And started working with them, met our lovely boss of the team, Edward Spenceley, shortly after that, and have been, working and learning alongside him for the last, 15 years. But I'd say really about, we've been able to start really telling that story of how to support, how how the bank provides the support, what we get to do to support businesses in this space really has, bubbled up over the last 6 years, especially, once Chris joined and has been an incredible asset for us. And, in the South, I say we were little GovCon evangelists, because we started really in the Florida area, and then we, grew out further than that. But, to really see that the bank supported it, and because we knew how to understand the industry from the large prime perspective, the Boeings, the Lockheeds, the Raytheons. But, on an average day, that's not where the bulk of any type of, access to capital is. It's in the small business space. So for us, knowing how we can support that and have those guardrails within the bank has just been an incredible asset to us. And so it's been a process to, grow the team and really just kind of get the word out there. And, we go to all the conferences and trade shows, and we, try to stay as active and connected as we can within our own markets and areas that we support.
Yeah, and I would add on. Christa can tell that story better than me because she's been at the bank longer than me, and she's really been alongside Edward as we've been building this out. But I think we're still continuing to work to make that better, Scott. I mean, in full transparency, just
Yeah.
because of the scale, right? It's not just the scale of our company, but we are focused on the small business space, right? Which is, I heard a gentleman at a conference speak, and he made the assertion. He's a speaker, right? So he must be an expert. He made the assertion that there's probably 300,000 businesses in the U.S. that will have to have some level of CMMC compliance, but that do work with the DoD, and so if that's true, I mean, this, right? The number of companies that are out there, right? So I think it's really been us getting the word out, kind of grassroots, letting our bankers know, going, as Christa said, going to the conferences. But I think also, tell their banker, tell their primary point of contact. I was on this podcast. I know you have a government group. They're more than happy to reach out to Christa or I. We also have other counterparts like us across the country. We work as a team, not in competition with each other. So what our goal is to connect them with whatever resource makes the most sense. And then also, if we meet someone who's not a bank client, most companies want to bank local, right? I make the joke because I'm a career banker that's moved into this role, right? And I always make the joke they want somebody they can have lunch with and have coffee and complain about their interest rate being too high, right? So we want them to have that. We want them to have that person, right? But we want them to be local and have a local resource alongside what we do, but have the strategic support from our team, folks, there that, as Christa said, they're trying to navigate this space, and it just is so specialized having that resource there to help them alongside that. And so we've raised that level, but we're still working on that. So, you giving us this opportunity on something like this actually helps us with that, to let folks know that if they are already a client, to reach, to to ask for that, to ask for that engagement, and more than happy to reach out to either one of us. And we can make sure that they're getting the support they need.
I love it. Well, let me ask you this question as we kind of come to a close. What are 2 or 3 things you wish people knew about Bank of America specifically and the government contracting team?
We're here to help. I mean, that to me is a simple. We're very, to us, we're very mission focused. We want to help kind of navigate. I always describe it as, we're both a consultant outside the bank to the business owners, but also inside the bank, because to Chris's point, we've got bankers that are fantastic at what they do. They do all the heavy lifting with the banking, with the treasury and the cash management services and all the different solutions that, that are available to a business. And that's their day-to-day point of contact. But when it comes into the government space, we help work alongside that banker internally just as much as we're going to help work alongside that company externally. So having that collaborative, engagement with us, I do many meetings with the bankers and the clients. Sometimes it's just the client because they have very simple questions, and we're going to talk shop, and the banker is like, you guys have at it. Sometimes they're just going to want to listen, and then they'll have a list of acronyms and questions for me after the fact. But, it all depends. But knowing that that's how, that banker is still your primary point of contact. So to Chris's point, they may be your local person that they can, go out with and have lunch more easily than, one of us that we may be covering a bigger territory. So we do love to work in tandem with them. And I will say the first question we usually get is, what's our billable rate or hourly rate? And we're honestly, we are employed by the bank. So, we come with the banking services essentially with, what we get to do every day.
That's awesome. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, if you're talking about our team, I think that we're, we think of this as a journey, right, for these companies, and so there's a lot of things that they need along the way, right? If we can be that resource and be that solution, then that's what we're here to do. But sometimes we're not, right? And sometimes it's not a bank question. It's like we talked about. It's hey, you need better legal advice, which we don't do, right? So let's get you to someone who does. But I think it's also thinking about being transparent with them. Say, okay, look, this isn't either a fit for us today for whatever reason, whether and why. Hopefully, we're giving them a why behind that. But here's a couple of folks. It might be someone like you, Scott. You should reach out to Scott, right? We want to help them continue the mission and further their business. Now, I get it as an entrepreneur or as a business owner. You may say, well, if you're not the one that's solving my problem today, what use are you to me? But I think at the same time, we still view that as being part of the solution, whether it's us delivering that solution or us connecting them with someone who can. And so I think that's what we've embraced, from our team. And I think, again, whatever that question may be, whatever that area may be, we're more than open to have that conversation with any company really, and help them engage, but also understand that it is a long process, and I think, they're in an industry, they should understand that, right? They think of what, if I'm going after a contract, what does that look like? That's usually not a 2-week effort, right? Some of those contracts are years in the making, right? Well, sometimes those relationships for us are years in the making too, and we understand that. And so I think there's a different perspective that we have, and to help those companies along the way. And then hopefully at some point, it's services that we provide, because we provide a lot of services, right? We're talking more about funding, we're talking more about capital, but as Christa said, she mentioned treasury, she mentioned solutions, right? There's retirement planning, there's things like that we do as well as a firm that we can, and so hopefully there's other areas we can support them along the way as on that journey. So
absolutely. So now we have someone who's doing government contracts, their financials are audited, they have banking relationships, they have multiple decade history, and they're a high performer. What questions do you wish they would be asking what the banks when they're out looking to find a bank to partner with? If you could pick 2 or 3 questions you'd love to pre-program they asked, what kind of things should they be asking that bank to make sure they're with the right place?
You go first, Christa.
Let's see. I would say, do you work with government receivables? I think that's going to be a very quick deal breaker, nail in the coffin type discussion, especially if you've got a company that is doing 100% government contracts. And from the beginning, you're told, no, we don't do government receivables. And that's just, that's what we've heard from, various levels, not to say that other banks are, doing it wrong. It's just, they may not have embraced it, but I'd say really just understand that part first. Cause I've seen where either they don't know that you're doing government work and they don't ask a lot of questions. They just see you as a service provider or a manufacturer, or you're selling a good, and that's how they look at you. Or on the other side is they find out you're doing government work and then it's unfamiliar to them. And then, the business can be held back a little bit, and not to, their detriment or that bank's detriment. It's just, an awareness and an understanding of how the industry operates. So I'd say, that could be a very simple question of, how do you all view government receivables, and could start that. But, obviously we love them. So it was a little self-serving in that question, but I'd say that is something that I see from various levels of, company sizes is, that's been the stories I've heard over the years.
Yeah, Scott, I think for me, I think that description, going back to what you just described, right? A company that's very bankable, they've got a lot of banking options, they have banking relationships. I think for us, I think from my perspective is sort of looking at, government contractors look at capabilities. I would say look at capabilities, right? I think a lot of times companies tend to think it's a commodity, right? It's, money's green. What does it matter? What's the interest rate? They default to that. Whoever got the lowest rate wins. And sometimes I get it. They're in a low cost environment from a government contracting perspective at times. And so they understand that. And they want to make sure they're competing in the same way. But I think for those companies, sometimes it's more about the long-term view, right? So when you look at where's the firm's level of engagement with my industry, what resources do they have outside of just the day-to-day banking, what other areas can they help me with, what do they offer, advisory services to help me think about that exit, whether, or whether that's an ESOP or whether that's a sale or whatever the case may be. There are things strategically that are going to matter to that business down the road? Are you thinking about those, or just where you are today? I think that's what I would do. I think the other one is, and maybe this is more because of, I'm in Huntsville, Alabama, which is kind of a big small town where everybody knows everyone. But I think sometimes we don't think about references, right? We got to be really careful about what you say about clients and sensitive to that. But we have clients that we have offered to let us use them as a reference, and and sometimes you get down the road in that process and they'll ask for references at the end, kind of like a job interview. I think sometimes it's good to ask those questions on the front end, because I think that sometimes can be an indication. Okay, if this is a company I know, this is somebody that I may be a teammate of mine, maybe somebody that I compete against, but I have a lot of respect for. If they value that relationship, then maybe that helps me evaluate, do I want to spend my time talking to a bank, XYZ bank or ABC bank, if I know kind of where they play in the industry, and I know maybe some of the clients they support that I may know. I think those are things that I talk to folks about as well, because I think a lot of times, the rates, the fees, a lot of that stuff at the end of the day it's going to probably be very similar regardless of the bank, right? Because, it just feels like it's going to work itself out that way. Not always. So I think really peeling back and looking at capabilities, looking at, even the bank platforms, things that are boring, but what's the technology that supports me? What are efficiencies that they can drive for me, in the back office, things that when they're evaluating that, I'd say kind of look at that first. And when those folks meet those capabilities, then I think it's time to dig in deeper and think about what are the rates, what are the structures, what are those kind of things. But those are just some thoughts. Again, you kind of catch me off the cuff, but yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
would say.
Well, I agree with you too. I love asking that question because, you know, to me, I think also is how do I access the form of credit that I'm receiving? You know, what's it like operationally? Can I plug it into my systems? Is it
Right.
hard to get? If you're only focused on price, there's a lot of other things you're going to find out quickly that you wish you'd pay a little more for, right? Or you wouldn't have cared as much.
Yeah.
And it works on the other side too. If all of your customers cared about, if you're moving forward now, you're a government contractor and you're trying to sell it. Only thing that matters is price and the performance, history, who your team is, how they're operating, et cetera, is the only thing they care about. They don't care about that at all. Only they care about is price. That's a really big problem, right? You wouldn't like that. I think
Right.
loan covenants, restrictions, what counts, what doesn't count, you know, like things that they may not understand. Like if you're working off of a borrowing base, when does something get bounced out? If there's a perfect example to your point, Chris, if you don't work with government receivables and you have a borrowing base that's made up of things getting kicked out at the 90-day mark, you might not like your very inexpensive line of credit, right? You know,
Right.
if you're with a bank that understands, oh yeah, don't worry, that's the such and such agency. They're always late. We don't even worry about them till they're at 150 days, you know? And by the way, how great would it be working with you to say, hey, look, on that contract, you better, I know you're going to bid for this new department. You know, by the way, that department is much different than this department you're currently working for. Their days outstanding are significantly longer. Like that's hugely valuable in a partnership for if you could learn that from your banker, for leveraging their relationships, that'd be really important when you go to bid a new department or picking the department you want to go work for. Um, so those are things I think are great points. Um, Last couple things, we call this kind of like the little fire round. So I want to leverage some of your guys' personal experience. Okay.
Okay.
What's the
This
best
last question
advice?
goes to Chris.
Yeah. What's the best advice you've ever received? Yeah. What's the best business advice you've ever received? And Chris, we'll let you go first.
Um, I think you touched on this earlier. You kind of touched on this, but in the way it was described to me is we don't have full control over our results, but we have 100% control over our actions and our activities and what we do, right? And I think that's hard to understand sometimes. It's you want, something didn't go the way you wanted it to, whether it's you didn't win the contract, you didn't win the banking relationship, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of factors that come into play. The government slid something to the right that was supposed to be awarded this month, and now it's going to be another 6 months to a year. You can't control those things, right? So I think control the things you can control your activities, control your actions, focus on what you do that well every day. And I think those, more often than not, you're going to be successful, and things will take care of themselves the way they should.
Yeah. Krista, do you have one you want to?
I would say similar to that. I would say, the advocating for yourself. So as, sometimes a smaller startup is, they may be nervous about going to a conference or a trade show or an industry day, but really just kind of knowing that you know what you know, and to leverage every opportunity you can to just have a conversation, just talk to somebody, because you never know what that conversation could lead to. And don't always go into it thinking that, well, what is it that you can do for me? And by flipping that mindset of, how can I help you, what is something that's your pain point, and redirecting the conversation a little bit, I think allows you to sometimes see different types of problems, different types of, concerns that would come from somebody from a different mindset or perspective. And it allows you to kind of navigate, what you're doing on a day to day. And then sometimes you may have the right answer. It may be somebody that that could help support somebody else. And then, I think putting a lot of that, goodwill out there is, for this industry, it very much comes back, full circle.
Yeah. Serve first. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
out with the intent to serve, help, find a way that you can utilize the things you are good at to help someone else, and that's your focus, undoubtedly, if you just go to a conference with that whole mindset, then that's it. You'll come out inherently with more customer opportunities or other things for yourself versus if you went in trying to figure out how many opportunities can I get for myself. It's one of the laws of nature that were provided, and we didn't make those rules up, but those are a rule. The faster you figure that out, the much more happy success you'll have. There's your business hack for the day, by the way. If you're looking for a hack, there it is.
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
it. Mhm.
All right. What's your favorite business related book?
Oh, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari.
I like that. I've never heard of that one.
It's a
The
little
monk
about
who's
business, a little about, personal development, but I'll just leave it with you with that on
the
that one.
monk who sold his Ferrari.
Yeah.
Love it.
Wow. No, I'm not even familiar with that book. I want to check that out.
Me neither.
Look
I'm
at
writing it down.
Krista
It works.
coming out of nowhere with that.
Book
That's
club
nice.
for the win.
I like
Um,
it.
I would say I'm not a big reader. I'm usually the one that waits for the movie to come out, right? Or the TV show, the series. But I would say Good to Great, Jim Collins. I think I've had some opportunities where I've been in leadership in different roles, and so the whole concept of get the right people on the bus and then get them in the right seats. I think having the right people on the team is where you start, and then you figure out where your skills. That resonates with me. Also, a big fan of John Maxwell. You talked about serve first, servant leadership. I would say that's probably one that an author I've read several books from as well. So I'll kind
Yeah.
of leave it there.
Yeah, those are required reading, in my opinion. Good to Great's a required reading for any entrepreneur, business owner, leader of a team, leader of yourself, and anything by John Maxwell isn't gonna hurt you. That's for sure.
No. I
That's
think
right.
there's one other one that I would mention, and I didn't really appreciate it while I was having to read it because it was a required reading for my MBA. But it's called The Goal. And so if you're a manufacturer, if you are, producing widgets kind of thing, it's all about the background of, kind of thinking through um, you know, when you've got backlogs and you've got bottlenecks of problems, how can you resolve it? What's different ways of looking at different solutions, and it's actually a great story. And by the way, it does come in a graphic comic novel, so you can find that. But it's a really interesting read.
I love it. You've given me two that I've never heard of before. I love it.
You're welcome.
All right, last question. When you meet someone new, what is one of the skills, talents, or attributes that you admire most when you see it in someone?
Engaging, personable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think communication's a big word, but I think it is, because I think I think both in probably other industries are right, but Chris and I are spending all our time in the government contracting space. And I think banking's a little like this too. There's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of you know, structure, things like that. And there's times when these can be very technical conversations. There's times when it can be just personal conversations. I think being able to sort of manage both of those, be able to communicate, when someone's trying to explain to us what they do, right? There's sometimes they can't tell us, right? It's classified. I can't tell you everything. But when they're trying to explain, the concept of, working on something like hypersonics, I'm going to need you to dumb that down for me. I'm not going to be the one that's going to be able to understand the technical side of it, right?
Yeah.
And so for them to be able to sort of explain what they do, put that in context, I think that's impressive to me. And I think that's important for our industry too, right? Because I think you have different times, you're trying to communicate to a business owner about like you talked about the bankability, what the things that we want to see improvement on, or areas that are great, things that aren't. But then you're also communicating internally with other stakeholders, your credit teams and different folks that want to, they're asking different questions. They want to know different things. And so I think that ability to be able to navigate that from a communication standpoint, I think is very important.
Yeah, those are great traits. And the way to be that way is to be yourself. Um, if you in a banking meeting a banker, going to the bank, trying to get a loan, needing money is one of those things that in human nature, and I'm guilty of it too, is one of those environments that can lead the path to making you think you should be someone that someone wants you to be. And that's the fastest way to be weird, not concise, and scary, like, because
Yeah.
you're not you, you're going to be really good at being you. You might as well just go be you, and then you'll probably be a lot more personable. You'll probably be more engaging. You'll probably be able to explain something in the most simple fashion. If I try to explain to you what we do at Mobilization Funding the way I think you want to hear it, when you are asking me a question that because you don't know, I'm much better answering it the way I would answer it, and that's it. It's going to be more natural. And I think that's a great spot to leave it. Like, this is a great, like, you want to work with your banker, be yourself, serve first. Read those 2 books that we've never heard of before. I'm going to knock those ones out for sure. And the required reading by John Maxwell and Good to Great with Jim Collins is for sure not going to miss. So Christa and Chris, thank you guys so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I know folks who are listening to this have a different perspective about the banking process, working with Bank of America, knowing that there actually is a government sector inside Bank of America that they can plug themselves into. And I really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing your insights and, decades of knowledge and information, not just in regular banking, but government contracting and everything in between. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
All right. How can people find you guys? You guys on LinkedIn, and you have your own YouTube channels, and you got cameras all over your house. Is there like pay-per-view they can plug right into and see a day in the life?
Christa should. Mine would be pretty boring. So yeah, we're both on LinkedIn, but if my life was a reality show, it'd probably be pretty boring. I don't know anybody would tune in. So, but
I just watch my kids with Legos and Minecraft.
I know, right?
I would say we do have a kind of just a generic inbox. It's govcon@bofa.com.
Perfect.
And that goes to our team. And then, at that point we can, read through the information and then, plug in the right team member, because we've got folks, to Chris's point, we've got folks in Seattle, San Diego, San Antonio, Dayton, Boston, DC, Tampa. I'm Knoxville, Tennessee. He's Huntsville, so we're everywhere across the country. So we'll plug you in the right, connectivity that makes sense, for our team. And we kind of call ourselves BVA Soft, but we're going to attack it wherever we need to.
I love it. Well, thank you guys so much. Everyone, that's the show. I hope you guys liked it. Please follow us all on LinkedIn. Connect with us. You can see this on YouTube. Connect with our YouTube channel. Share it with some friends. If anyone that you know that's out looking for a banking relationship, there's plenty to learn that we talked about, especially for those folks that are looking at government contracts, trying to learn more. Please share the show. In the meantime, have a great week and God bless you.